Okay. Hi, my name is Daniel Foley Carter from SEO-audits.io, and today this is the Google Helpful Content Ranking Recovery webinar. So what we will be doing today is we will be learning and talking about Google's helpful content updates. We will be going through processes, so some of the things that you can look at doing to mitigate losses, to identify why you might have been hit, where the intrinsic problems are with your website, with your content, and lots of other things. So Google obviously has been pushing out helpful content updates now since 2022, and we're seeing more and more people now adversely affected by these updates. They are brutal for a lot of industries, primarily because of the way that they work in how they evaluate content. And they are not specifically targeting, low-end content. So with a lot of the algo updates Google has done over the years, Google has always trended towards attacking things when it comes to low quality. However, helpful content isn't necessarily looking at content, that's deemed not to be helpful. So basically, for years and years and years, people would, adopt spammy SEO tactics to rank, and Google would always be struggling to catch up, with anything that people were doing, whether it was PBNs or whether it was black hat links, and lots of different things. So effectively, Google has now started to compartmentalize more and more of its algorithms, and the helpful content update is really centered around actually knowing, is what you're creating beneficial to the end user. Content doesn't have to be bad quality to be impacted by the helpful content update. So I'm now going to share my screen, and I have an itinerary. And I'm just making sure there is absolutely nothing left that could pop up. Okay. Right, let's do this. So I'm going to share my screen. And I just want to make sure that you can all see my screen. Just drop in the chat. Brilliant. Okay. So down to business, finally. 30 minutes after it should have been, but there we go. Can I just ask, you can see my screen. Can you see me at all in there, or is it? So you can see me in the, okay, all right, that's fine. Okay. So Google helpful content update. So the itinerary that we're going to go through is here. So what are the helpful content updates? Why is Google putting on so much emphasis on helpful content? What the future of search may look like over the next year, what Google says it looks for, what should we be looking at, how can we measure helpful content? There's quite a lot of stuff for us to get through. So first of all, what are the helpful content updates? So obviously, now I'm sharing my screen, I'll just sort of elaborate on it. So the general premise of helpful content is content that not only meets end user needs, but it's content that is likely to fulfill a purpose. Okay. So fulfilling a purpose is at the forefront of what Google is working towards. And I'll give you some really, really basic analogies in relation to that. So for example, hypothetically, if you were to Google cheap cars and you were to get an article or articles come up that were really well written, high quality articles talking about cheap cars, why should you buy a cheap car? Where can you buy a cheap car? How long, can I own a cheap car for? What are the best makes of cheap car? It could be really professionally written content. but it's not helpful content because it's not meeting the needs of the user. Someone searching for cheap cars wants to see cheap cars. And what we have to take into consideration is where the user is. So someone in London searching for cheap cars isn't going to want to see an article about cheap cars, and they're not going to want to see a car dealership selling cheap cars that's in Cornwall because it's not convenient, it's a long way away, and so forth. So helpful content isn't, the helpful content updates aren't explicitly focused on low quality content. Okay, Google's spam updates target low quality content. Google's EAT updates hit low quality content. But helpful content is content that will ultimately mean the end user gets what they need in the shortest amount of time. And we'll cover off like behaviors and things that can indicate whether a piece of content is doing its job. Now, I'll share this deck with you after, and I will be adding to the deck as well. So you'll get like links and references and everything. So there are two key URLs. Some of you probably have already seen these and read them. Some of you may not have. So we have to look at, you know, explicitly what Google is saying that we should be asking ourselves when, you know, when we're evaluating the content that we produce. So effectively, the main thing that they're trying to get at here is people first content. And the reason that they've got such a drive to this is because for most of the time that Google has existed, it could not differentiate between content written for search engines and content written for people. I mean, there were like cases where it could, you know, if someone was putting cheap cars into the article 400 times, then it would be obvious. But Google didn't have the power. It didn't have the level of machine learning and AI, and it didn't have as much data as it does now. So for a long time, people could, you know, create an article that wasn't actually that good and they could rank it. Most of what has existed in SEO over the last 20 years has always been to create content for search engines. So people in SEO never said to a client, oh, you know, we're going to create content for people. Most of SEO over the last 2 decades has been, you know, we need to do this because we want to rank. And the moment that you say that means that you're biased towards creating content for the purpose of ranking. You're not saying, well, you know, let's not worry about rank. Let's focus on creating something really amazing for users. Now, in the past, that would have been a problem for you, but now it's not. And as each iteration of helpful content update rolls out, more and more, Google is basically clamping down on anything that looks like it's been created to rank rather than putting people first. So here they highlight about self-assessing your content. So evaluating your own content against these questions can help you gauge if the content you're making is helpful and reliable. Beyond asking yourself these questions, consider having others you trust but are unaffiliated with your site provide an honest assessment. So basically what they're saying is that create something and then ask people that you know that aren't biased whether they would find your content helpful. Now, the reality is that that's actually not very good advice from Google, surprisingly. And why would I say that? Well, you can have 100 people with 100 different opinions. Okay. How many people are going to take a piece of content that they created and ask 100 people? They're not. You know, at best, they might ask 5 people, 10 people. But the general consensus is that you're not going to be able to get enough of a data set. You can get some low-level feedback, which you might be able to action upon. But generally, you know, you're not going to get enough feedback from enough people to truly understand. And that's a part of what this webinar is about as well. What data points can you start looking at? So we've got a list of questions here, content and quality questions. So does the content provide original information? Does the content provide a substantial, complete, or comprehensive description of the topic? And you can see all the points here. We're gonna go through these in more detail. So it's basically saying, well, you know, ask yourself these questions, and then about expertise. So helpful content and EAT run parallel to one another. Okay, so EAT is really about being able to demonstrate expertise, demonstrate that you know what you're talking about, that you have authority, and that the content that you put out is trustworthy. That runs alongside helpful content. So what you want to be doing is making sure that your content is helpful, fulfilling end user needs, but also at the same time, while it's being helpful, it should be factually correct. It should cite sources. It should be something that screams someone who's written this knows what they're talking about. And this will also, we'll also talk a little bit about AI content, because AI content has been a hot potato now for, since November last year, where ChatGPT rolled out, and loads of people are churning out content by the bucket load using AI. And there's a very good reason why AI content generally doesn't perform, doesn't get indexed, or it might perform briefly and then drop out. And that's because AI content doesn't take into consideration human construct. It doesn't take into consideration order or information prioritization. There's loads of areas that AI content doesn't comply with, which is why, going down that route is a risky one. And then alongside our helpful content and alongside EAT, we've then got to make sure that, not only is our content helpful, and not only can it be trusted, and not only is it factually correct, and those facts that are stated are verifiable and third-party sources, that it should all be packaged into something that people look at and they like it, they engage with it. Again, you could write the most amazing article in the world, but if you just chuck it in a web page, no formatting, no imagery, not broken up, doesn't look right, looks really slapped together, that's not going to give you a good page experience. And even if the content is really well written, they're not going to want to engage with it or digest it, or they might engage with it initially and then just get fed up with it being monotonous. So great page experience ties in with that. Okay. And you can see here, they just keep emphasizing on people first content. Okay. And how we understand what people first content is all indicative of search intent. So creating people first content is putting the end user first. Now, if you took 1,000 people, not all of them are going to appreciate your content. So the way it works is based on majority. So as long as the majority of clicks that you get exhibit positive interaction behavior, that's all that matters. Not everyone will find your content as good as you do. Not everyone will like the imagery that you use or the videos that you use. That is just part and parcel of humans and self-interpretation and whatnot. So categorically, creating search engine first content is something that you really now need to be avoiding. Now, as with anything in SEO, we use the word "it depends," which is a joke in the industry. Search engine first content will continue to work. It's not going to disappear overnight. It's going to take many, many years, many, many iterations of helpful content to truly get rid of it. But why put yourself in the firing line? Why not start today with a clear focus of the content that you're going to work on moving forwards really does take into consideration people's needs. So effectively, Google here is setting the tone, and it's very mild. So they're not explicitly stating things. They're asking you to consider things. They're saying get to understand the guidelines. Now, this is something that I do advocate, and I know a lot of people have heard about them, but not many people have read them. And they recently updated EAT guidelines as well. But so we've got search quality rater guidelines, and this is what they give users that go out onto search results at Google and manually assess the results. So let me explain very briefly. When you do a search in Google and you see the websites there, Google has to have internal team members that vet the results. Let me explain why. Algorithms are computational. So Google releases an update, but that doesn't necessarily mean that that update has actually, yielded good results. So sometimes Google will do an update and the quality raters who have learned all about the things to look for are then going out onto Google, conducting searches to work out, has this algo got it right? Okay. So if you understand the premise of what the quality raters are looking for, you're going to have a better understanding fundamentally of the content that Google is expecting and the touch points that they're looking at. And again, as with a lot of these things, we're going to, as we go through the webinar, we're going to cover lots of these points. So I highly recommend going through this. There's also additional EAT guidelines, which I will share. So then we have to ask who, how, and why about our content. So fundamentally, this is where helpful content and EAT converge. So when we're creating our amazing helpful content, we apply EAT retrospectively. And, then we want to be able to, demonstrate that the people or the person that wrote the article, has experience, they understand the topic, and, they can demonstrate that experience. So who is things like an author profile, the author bio, any third-party content that they've produced for publications that can be linked to, social media, lots of different things that basically establish who the author is. How the content was created, so how was it put together? And you can see here that, and Google did reword this, they don't have a problem with AI content. So Google isn't specifically out to get AI content. Google is specifically out to get content that isn't helpful. Because AI has a tendency to produce content that isn't helpful, that's why AI content generally tends to get hit by helpful content updates. So if you've been using AI as part of your content strategy, depending on how much content you've been basically substituting against, a writer that knows the industry, you will likely need to go back to the drawing board with AI content. And you will need to go through the helpful content assessments. We're going to go through them. And what we're going to do today, we're going to use one of my own websites, which I've neglected heavily over the last 2 years. I've neglected it very heavily, unintentionally. It's my scooter guide site. I had intended on monetizing it, but with the best will in the world, there's only so many hours in a day and there's only so many things I can manage. And those of you that know me will know that I'm heavily invested in SEO stack, SEO audits. So, I can't manage everything. This has been hit by the helpful content update. It's been hit by other updates over the last 16 months. At its peak, it was doing around 5,000 clicks a day. Sadly, I'm now down to 400 clicks a day. And to be honest, I'm not overly fussed because the site wasn't monetized, so I haven't lost any income from it. And what I will do is I will, off the back of this webinar, use this as a case study for my own recovery. So I've sort of let this deteriorate without really worrying about it too much. But we're going to do some assessments today, and we're going to treat this site as if this was one of your own sites. So you can typically see different trends in the data. So when it comes to content creation, there's another thing that I think is really important. When you are embarking on any content strategy, the niche will depend heavily on how much expertise is needed. So complex niches like finance, health, these industries have heavy regulation, and generally if you're producing content, you're going to need to really think about using writers that are specialists in those fields. So a lot of businesses, a lot of SEO agencies, a lot of in-house businesses will have writers that are more general writers. Okay, so you give them a brief and they can write about content in all different areas. But the problem is that, if you gave a general writer a brief to write about something in law, someone that is a specialist in law will be able to pick apart a generalist writer's content. Whereas if someone is a legal writer and they specialize in legal content, because they understand the premise of law, the probability that they'll generate good content goes up significantly. Okay, so how the content was created is not just about AI, it's about who created it and were they any good at it. And what you will find is that there are so many instances where writers produce content and that content never goes on to do anything, or it gets put in crawled, currently not indexed, discovered, currently not indexed. And those of you with a website, should be using Search Console. Again, we're going to go through that shortly. Those of you that haven't used Search Console or aren't using it, should be using it. And we need to understand, when we start evaluating our site for how helpful the content is, we need to understand what Google isn't indexing, because that can also be an indicator that our content isn't helpful enough. So why are we creating content? Now, this is another really important tie-in. Why do we create content? Well, I said earlier that because we want to give people something useful. Well, the reality is that the end product needs to be clicks. So whatever way you look at it, we are creating content because we want the click, we want the purchases, we want the inquiries, we want people to spend money or to inquire. So why we create content? Well, we need to create it to get traffic to our site. But I guess what Google's trying to convey here is, are you trying to create content for it, or are you trying to create content for the end user? So we're going to think of creating content for the end user that is so well written and so well constructed, and it meets the necessary guidelines that it goes on to rank. And it will set you up for security in the longer term. And in here, there's a second link. Google Search's helpful content system in your website. So basically, they give you a very broad overview. As with anything in Google, they're never gonna give you too much information. They'll always spoon feed bits of information. But there's some interesting points in here that I'm going to highlight. So the helpful content system aims to better reward content where visitors feel that they've had a satisfying experience, while content that doesn't meet a visitor's expectations won't perform as well. Now, this is a huge statement, okay? Without them even saying it, this is a big statement. How does Google know whether or not someone's had a satisfying experience? Well, we know Googlebot doesn't question people that visit a site. Behavior. So behavior is what Google has to go by to understand, are we serving stuff that meets the end user's need? So I'm going to do something. I'm going to perform a search. For cheap shoes. Now, it's really important to understand, the best indicator for whether something is good is behavior. Okay. And I'm going to draw some magic in Paint. I've been using Paint a lot more recently. Oh, where'd you go? All right, you come back. So, for many, many years, you'd have your website. This is your website. Gone off there. Right, you had your website, okay, whatever it was. Let's just say cheaptrainers.co.uk. And for a long period of time, one of the biggest indicators of whether or not your site was probably a better fit for the end user was links. Okay. Now, what you have to bear in mind is that, like a child, Google many years ago was a child. It didn't understand lots of different things. It didn't have the power to understand. It was learning. It's the same thing as your mobile phone. Your mobile phone 15, 20 years ago couldn't do anything what they can do now. Now a mobile phone has more processing power, than a computer 10 years ago. Okay. So as technology evolves and software and algorithms evolve, we start to get more data. But if we go back to the past, Google relied heavily on links. And the premise was, if something's good, more links are going to go to it. That was the basic premise. And it worked to a low level degree. Okay. And it's the same as when you vote for a political party. The political party that gets the most votes is the party in power. No worries. Anyone that has to jump, you'll get the recording once it's finished. So effectively, for a long time, links were there, and then you'd have your content in your page that, generally would have a lower weight. You had your content, and that was really it. Like, you had tech SEO. So tech SEO, did have a fairly sizable weighting, but the reality is that most tech SEO was very top level. As long as Google could crawl and index your content, it would be looking at basic things, H1s, H2s, title tags, meta tags. Okay. And fundamentally, the more links you had, the more likely you were to rank, as long as your content, said explicitly what it was. But this is where the problem existed for a long time, because people with bad websites could rank well. Okay. So lots of people that wanted to start making money would set up websites, and they would generate thousands of spammy links. They'd churn out mass volume of low quality content, but they would generally all make sure that they had good tech SEO. That's like one thing that stayed uniform. But these areas were open to exploitation and spam. So what happens? The search results fill up with low quality results. What does that do if Google doesn't address it? It causes Google to lose its market share. Now, some of you may or may not remember, many, many years ago, before Google, Yahoo was the biggest search engine in the world. Yahoo was 1,000 times bigger than Google. Okay. But where Google won was Google served better quality results. Yahoo had loads of spam, really poor. So if Google slips and doesn't maintain its profile, it will lose market share. Okay. Because people will think, well, the quality of results are just poor all the time. Why am I going to use it? I'll go elsewhere. But for a long time, Google didn't have the power to stop spam. It couldn't keep up. You had Panda, you had Penguin. Yes, it got rid of some of it, but for so long, Google just couldn't do it. But then roll on AI. Okay. So AI has significantly changed the way that SEO, the direction of SEO is heading in. Okay. Because for years and years and years, Google couldn't read a piece of content and know that it was good. It would look at keywords. Even in the earlier days, keyword density. It would look at semantic terms, so terms that were similar to it. Okay. But that's nearly all it had. It couldn't compute anything else. So someone could literally write, an article about cheap trainers, put cheap trainers in there 100 times and rank. And as long as they had loads of links coming in, they would rank. So moving towards modern SEO. Modern SEO looks nothing like this, and I couldn't draw it on here. I couldn't draw it on a thing even if it was 50 times the size. So what's happened is each thing Google has attacked independently. Okay. So for example, to address the growing problem with links, Google turned to AI. And what's it using now? It's using spam brain. So we know AI gets exponentially more powerful. AI can detect patterns in linking. It can detect link networks. It can find things so much more efficiently than in the older days where they would launch Panda, Penguin. Now they've got AI. So they have categorically gone after links and spammy links. Now, you know, obviously AI is still evolving, so their algos are going to continue to evolve, but they're going to evolve at a rapid rate. And when we come to content, well, content is a whole different kettle of fish. So the main things for content are EAT, YMYL, helpful content. These are the areas that as SEOs, we should know inside out. And what each of these things does is it compartmentalizes how it evaluates content. So EAT is really more about who wrote the content. You know, is it trustworthy? Is it factually correct? You know, can we identify the author? Can we identify and verify the author? Okay. And what this does is it effectively just makes it harder for people to, you know, churning out mass content that's of lower value. You know, people can create fake EAT signals, but Google will catch up on that. And it already is in many areas. And then this part of the algorithm, rather than it looking at keywords, keyword density. Oh, I needed to add Google BERT on there. When we look at helpful content, how can you evaluate if something's helpful? Well, what we do is we give people guidelines. Those guidelines help you to shape your content as people first. And if your content is people first, what happens? Increased engagement, more transactions, or transactional behavior. More interactions, and so forth, just top level. So my original point was, how does Google interpret if something's helpful? Well, it could never do it with traditional algo factors. It has to look at engagement. Now, in the old days, if someone comes on this and it's low quality, they're just going to abandon it and go elsewhere. But that meant nothing to Google back in the day because it couldn't do anything with that data. But now Google can do something with that data. So it brings me to this. Now, the reason that I love SEO so much is because the story never ends, okay? And I'll do one example of it before we go back to the deck and start rolling through the slides. Okay. So in here, I've put increased engagement, okay? More transactions, more interactions. Now, if we look, increased engagement, you'd say, well, I've written a piece of content, people engage with it for longer. That's a good thing. But as with everything in SEO, one condition leads to another condition that leads to another condition. And this is why it's so important when you're learning SEO is to get under the bonnet of everything, because, you know, when you see people, I'm not going to name any names, but I think most of you will know who I'm referring to. There are various SEOs out there who will make it look like, SEO is easy, just do this, blah, blah, blah. My advice is just don't ever be super careful with people like that. Most people that say something is easy is, probably either trying to sell you something or they've got other people to do the work for them to make it look like, just do this. So increased engagement. Increased engagement can be good and it can be bad. So what happens is, and this is why Google has to use machine learning AI, because there's so many data points that converge, it can end up with thousands of combinations to start working things out. Basically, Google looks for patterns in data. So if I Googled how many paracetamol to take in a day, paracetamol to take in a day, what we have to ascertain every time we do a search in Google, Google has so many complex functions as part of its algorithm to determine what content to return. Okay. So when we're talking about helpful content, what do we think helpful content is going to be in the grand scheme of our question? Well, if I've got a headache or I've got a toothache and I'm sat thinking, well, how many paracetamol to take in a day? Then the probability is that I want to go on a piece of content and see my answer. Okay. And my answer could be, you can safely take up to 8 paracetamol per day, 2 every 4 hours. Okay. For many people, their engagement time could be 30 seconds. Okay, so let's say, the piece of content ranks in Google, as a SERP result or under people also ask. So if you were to say to someone, I wrote this article, it has an average time on page of 30 seconds. People are going to think, that's really bad. 30 seconds. People should be on your content longer than that. No, they shouldn't. Because the context of what someone wants will be the indicator of how much time they're probably going to spend. So how would Google say, well, what is a good and what is a bad time? Well, that's very simple. Engagement time is connected to behavior. Okay. So if we take a piece of content that people click on and they engage with it for 30 seconds, what can then Google then start looking at next as a touch point? Behavior. So behavior falls next into the sequence. What did the user do once they went on this content? The behavior, let me just maximize this and make this bigger. Wish it would just drag down more in one go. So the behavior is the next secondary factor. So let me just get a little person icon. So what we're going to do, we're going to get, there's one thing I forgot to do is put my phone on silence. So here's our little person. They've got a headache. Just to be professional, I'm going to put a sad face on them because they don't have a face. There you go. Much better. I knew I should have been an artist. I've always loved paint. I don't know why. I use Photoshop as well. Right. So they were either sad or happy. Oh, what am I doing? They're either sad or happy. So someone that's sad because they didn't get the answer they want may click back on their browser and go back to the search results. Just going to put that. Okay. So this person didn't spend long on the content, and their behavior says that they didn't really get the information or the answer that they wanted. So they click back. If, however, the user was happy and said, oh, okay, I can take that many paracetamol, they're going to end the session. Okay. And a session end can be close the tab or navigate manually elsewhere. Because you're not going to close your tab every time you've finished on a website. You'll probably go www. and go to something else, or you'll search Google for something else. But the point is that the behavior is going to be an indicator. Now, what Google will do is it will collect this data continuously. And using machine learning and AI, sorry, I'm going to just turn my phone off because it's just going to keep ringing otherwise. There we go. So what then happens is that we end up with, more and more behavior data over time. Okay. And this is the best indicator of whether something is doing its job. Okay. And each part of this is a floating dynamic. What I mean by that is if we took this and if I open up another paint session, if we did the same thing, okay, and let's say someone searched for cheap trainers or cheap shoes, which is what we're going to do now. So I went to Google, there's position 1, position 2, position 3, and so forth. Okay. Right. So I've gone on Google. I've gone on Google. Sorry, it's really bad. And I've done a search for cheap shoes. Now, the thing that's important to understand here is that the behavioral evaluation is going to change. Let me explain why. So let's say our person goes to Google and they go on result 1. Okay. They go on result 1 and they see, that there are, I don't know, 25 pairs of trainers. Okay. And they go on there and they're on there for a minute or so and they don't find what they want. So let's say a 1-minute session. Okay. And let's say they only navigate 1 page. When that session is abandoned, what they're going to do is they're going to go back to the search results, and then they might go to position 2. And position 2, and then we'll do position 3. Okay. And let's say on the second site, they're on there for, so let's say there's 100 pairs of trainers and 2 minutes 20 secs. Okay. And lastly, the final one, there's, I don't know, 95 pairs of trainers, but the session duration is 45 seconds. Okay. Because, you know, maybe that website's really badly designed, or they haven't got great reviews, or there could be loads of different factors. And let's say the user ends their journey. Okay, so they've been through the 3 sites. So what Google is going to be doing is it's going to be looking at what these people are doing. Okay, so it's going to look at how long a page level session is, how long a page duration is, how long a session is, and a session is based on all of the pages in that journey. So then what starts to happen is Google will start aggregating this data to see, you know, which sites are satisfying the most people. So let's say 1 in every 10 buys a product and terminates the session. Okay, because they've gone through the checkout, they've bought their cheap shoes, and they end their session. Okay, so their session basically means they're not going back to Google. Let's say 5 in every 10 here buys a product, terminates session. And then here, 8 in every 10 buys a product and ends and terminates the session. Now, what we're doing here is we could look at this and go, well, you know, they've got the shortest session, you know, but if the behavior indicates that, you know, after so many interactions, you know, this is a higher point where things terminate, then the probability that this is doing its job, irrespective of engagement time, goes up. Okay, so everything that we have to look at from a helpful content perspective will have a subset of data to look at. Okay, now we're just looking at a very small, tiny portion of data. There's loads of other things that Google can see, and believe you me, you know, I'm not into conspiracies or anything like that, but I've worked in this industry a long time. Google says one thing and they do another. And I've done countless testing over the years. I've got loads of examples of stuff where I've done testing, and I'll show you one. The fact is that Google has access to an unbelievable amount of anonymized data. What that means is Google doesn't need to know that this is Paul or James or Sarah or Karen. Google doesn't need to know whether they're 35 or whether they're male or female or what their ethnicity is. Google doesn't need that data. So it doesn't need to understand or profile people. It can use anonymized data to start looking at what are people doing. Now, when you take this data and then you're using machine learning and AI to compute this, you're then starting to serve things that behaviorally are exhibiting themselves as the best match for end users. Okay. Now, obviously, this isn't going to always work for everyone. You know, if you take 100 people searching, not everyone is going to have a good experience. But the point is that Google is moving more and more towards not only being able to decipher what helpful content is, but it's able, and this is why their indexing policy is changing. As Google gets more and more powerful, and they're not indexing as much, but they're really looking at refining the data that they've got, they'll be able to do more real-time personalization, behavioral-based content serving, as opposed to traditional serving factors. So if we look, if I am searching Google, you know, my expected engagement time, my expected behavior is part of an indicator. Now, let me provide one other scenario really quickly. Imagine this wasn't cheap shoes. Imagine this was a plumber near me. Okay. Now, what then happens, and this is, I'm not even kidding you, it gets so unbelievably deep. Like if I was to drill into it, we'd be here all night, all day, all night. If we looked at something like plumber near me, our little friend here might navigate in, bounce out, navigate in, bounce out, navigate in, bounce out across loads of results. Okay. And they might only be on there for 20 seconds, 20 seconds, 30 seconds, and they're in and out and they're bouncing between things. And you'd think, okay, well, you know, what can Google make from that data? Well, people get quotes, don't they? Do you think our friend really cares about the ins and outs of what, you know, a 4,000 word about plumbers near me? No, they probably want to go on the website, get a quick quote, see if there's pricing, and leave. But that's not indicative of a bad site. So as with anything in SEO, Google layers factors one on top of another. Okay, so this only forms part of it. When we come to things like, you know, specifying intent in a term, we trigger other ranking factors. So putting the word near me in is going to trigger localization. Localization is then going to look at phone number, address, reviews, searches from that localization. So behavior forms one part of a big pie. And in SEO, there is loads of big pies. There's lots of it. So if anyone ever tells you SEO is easy, please feel free to take a snippet of this recording and send it to them. So when I go through, and this is interesting, okay, so I've actually just put cheap shoes in. I haven't specified whether I'm male or female. I've just put cheap shoes, and ironically, I'm getting cheap shoes for women, shoes zone, men's, women's, and kids, women's outlet shoes. So this is interesting. This is a great example. Helpful content is also centered around split intent. Okay, so sometimes you'll do a search for something and your search indicates an intent. So in this case, we want to buy a footwear product. Cheap means we want to purchase it at lower cost. Shoes is a thing, an entity, shoes, footwear. But because we haven't specified cheap shoes for men, cheap shoes for women, what Google's done is it's alternated the results. So there is variation in the results because the search is generic. The best chance Google's got of satisfying my query is by, rather than it serving all women's shoes or all men's shoes, it's diversified. Okay. So all of that just from this. So Google could be looking at engagement time, how many pages were traversed in a session. It can also look at CTR. It can look at scroll and interaction events. It can look at so many different data points. Right. So here they've said the system generates a site-wide signal that we consider among many other signals for use in Google search, which includes Discover. The system automatically identifies content that seems to have little value, low added value, or is not otherwise particularly helpful to people. So fundamentally, what they're going to be able to do is aggregate lots of different data points to work out, you know, whether or not something is going to be good for the end users. Any content, not just unhelpful content, on sites determined to have relatively high amounts of unhelpful content, overall, it's less likely to perform well in search. Now, I said this 5 years ago. 5 years ago, I was saying this. And as with anything in the SEO community, people will always argue. You know, one person will say one thing, one will do another. Everything I've ever stated in my life has always been backed by data. But one of the things I've always said to people is if you have content on your website that doesn't do anything Get rid of it. It does not add any value. And as it says there, if you've got a growing portfolio of low value content or dead content, and you're not getting rid of it, you're devaluing your whole site. So even if you've got good articles, good content, you're going to drag down the performance of that content. So it's absolutely crucial. And again, I've covered it in the slides. In order for you to start your helpful content journey, the first place you need to start is clearing up everything that you've already got. Before you even think about producing another article for your SEO strategy, put the brakes on, stop, and go back to what you've already got. Now, let me tell you, most sites have content that should be removed. If you're running a blog, a review site, or you're running a client site, what you should be looking at is how much of that content can we get rid of, and then you should have a process moving forwards so that you're making sure that you don't accrue this content over time. I'm really sorry, I put this phone on mute. This is one of those days where because I'm obviously under pressure, everything goes wrong. So I put my phone on mute, and yeah, people continue to ring. So I'm just going to switch it off altogether. Okay. Right, there we go. Right. So, and here they've stated that it's a classified process. It's entirely automated using a machine learning model. It works globally across all languages. It's not a manual action nor a spam action. Instead, it's one of many signals Google evaluates to rank content. Basically, you're not going to get any notification for it. It will just drop like a stone or deteriorate. Anyway, so I advise you to read this. Now, there's a lot in here. So let's make some headway so I can start demonstrating. So in the deck that I'll share with you, there is a list of updates here. And if you Control F and just put in helpful, you will see that the first iteration of helpful content updates started from August last year. So the helpful content algo is over a year old now, and we can see that there have been 3 helpful content updates over the last year. And for many, the helpful content updates have been amongst the most brutal. So it's always good to know, bookmark this so you can always see what they're publishing in terms of updates, when it's rolling out, when it's complete. So I think we've pretty much covered this. Helpful content updates are aimed specifically at devaluing search engine first content, devaluing content that is less focused on what end users are likely to need or want, content that doesn't serve a clear purpose. So basically, you've got a client and you're just writing blogs for the sake of it, and you come up with ideas, or the new trend is using ChatGPT to write all of your blog ideas and then blindly following it, not realizing that maybe, half, 3/4, if not all of them have got no search demand. So you're creating content for no audience. So that content really doesn't have a purpose. It's just the sake of creating content for the sake of it. Anyone in the SEO space? So, and I've been guilty of it. So this isn't a dig at anyone, but there's far too much emphasis on content as a deliverable for SEO. So the problem is that it's easier to get a client to pay an invoice if you can churn out articles. The problem is that, creating content for the sake of it as a deliverable is not good for SEO, and you shouldn't be doing it. And if you are doing it, reconsider the strategy. Why? Because if you're building a house of cards, it only takes a little bit of wind to blow the whole thing down. It takes one core update to decimate a site. So you should focus on identifying things that you've got in terms of objectives, profiling the end users, and then creating a strategy that looks at how can you create something for those end users and making it EAT compliant. And content that may have bias, less accurate. So this is actually another really important thing, and this applies to people running affiliate sites. So affiliate sites are picked on heavily by Google because they have bias, okay? And what I mean by that is a piece of content, like, I don't know, maybe you want to buy a mobile phone, you want to get the latest iPhone 56, whatever model they're on now. They keep pushing ones that look exactly the same. But anyway, that set aside, you want to buy the phone. So you want to do research. Review sites generally get revenue, commission revenue. Either they get affiliate revenue from commission providers or from whoever they have a relationship with, where if they send people through that transact, they earn a commission, or ads. But generally, if people make money from content and they want to encourage people to buy something, they're going to have a bias towards positivity. Okay, and Google is going after that as well. All right, because if people are searching for a review and all of the articles are just constantly positive and they've got an overly positive bias, people might buy them, but then be like, well, there's loads of bad things about this. I wish I hadn't bought the phone. And that doesn't instill a good user experience. What Google wants is honest content. So if you've got an honest review, and if a product genuinely is not good and you've got an honest review, what's going to happen is that, you're going to create content that's going to put people off of buying that product, which means you're not going to get the commission revenue. Okay. But that is what Google wants. It wants honest, unbiased content. So keep that in mind. So why is Google putting so much emphasis on helpful content? Well, it's because Google is moving to a new state of content evaluation. So like with everything evolves over time. For too long, Google has relied on traditional ranking factors. Just because you put your keywords in a title tag, in a H1 tag, and just because you write it in the content, that doesn't mean your content is good. And even if your content is good, if it's not aligned with search intent, then good content is no good. Search intent trumps everything, and search intent is what will set the indicators of what good content is. So this is another one. You're an SEO, freelance in an agency, and a business comes to you and they sell, I don't know, boutique coats, let's say. If they want to sell their product and they're boutique and they've got, I don't know, maybe they've got 5 different jackets and they come to you, you need to be prepared to say, no, we can help you to rank and to sell your product. But when it turns out what keyword strategy you're going to go for, well, from an intent perspective, you're going to need to target high-end terms. You're going to need to target things, you wouldn't target buy coats online or buy coats or, I don't know, a type of coat. You would go after something super niche because, again, if you've got 5 coats and, they're expensive and you're trying to rank for an audience that, where they want range and price, doesn't matter how hard you push it, it's not going to work. So Google is putting so much emphasis on helpful content because it moves in tandem with their evolution as a search engine. Get rid of bad results. Stop people ranking low quality content. Stop people being able to spam at content level. And even though Google's still not beating it, it's moving in that direction. So helpful content improves end user experience. The better the experience, the better job Google is doing as a search engine, and it will continue to maintain and grow its market share. So the emphasis is to continue to maintain market share of search and grow market share and to get rid of anything. So the other reason why helpful content comes at a good time as well is with the boom of AI, you've got AI working as part of the algo, but you've also got people using AI to generate content. And, people, especially programmatic sites, people churning out content at volume with no care. This is the kind of thing that Google is really going to clamp down on. So if you're using AI content as part of your strategy, you need to be extremely careful. What the future of search may look like over the next year. Now, I probably shouldn't have said next year. It's probably going to be the next couple of years. But what I envisage with, the patents that they've been filing and, the tech that they've got and, with the sheer power that they've got, in terms of their own deep AI, and I think what's going to happen over the next couple of years is that results are going to be more dynamic. So traditionally at the minute, you get a bit of day-to-day bouncing around in the SERPs here and there. Then a core update comes along and shakes things up, and you get new sites, old sites displaced, and things change generally more during a core update. But moving forwards into the future, I can honestly see Google revisiting personalization. So, based upon your previous behaviors around buying cheap trainers, Google will be more primed, to understand from behavioral data what it's more likely is that you want. I think there'll be more real-time updates. So Google will do more real-time updates on the fly, as opposed to doing, specific updates during the year. Again, this is speculative. This isn't confirmed or anything like that. It's my views. And I think that they will continue to widen their data point analysis. I think as they collect more and more data and they're able to use that, and machine learning will become more powerful, will head in that direction of real-time results. What Google says it looks. Now, just before we go on, I understand this webinar is about ranking recovery. So people might be going, oh, you're going on and on and on about helpful content. Well, you need to understand all the premises of this before you can even think about ranking recovery, because the more and more you understand the construct of what helpful content is, and to understand what the algo might be looking at, the more likely you are to be able to go back and start looking at your stuff and going, hey, actually, we've been putting our content and we've been putting too much above the fold, and it doesn't look like that's working very well. We'll change it. There are lots of nuances to this. So we've already covered this. So is what Google's looking for. It's not saying it in that sense, but the fact that they're saying, question these things. Well, if they're suggesting that you question yourself on it, well, they're going to be looking at these things. Okay. So, does the content provide original information, reporting, research, or analysis? Well, Google will be looking for that. Does the content provide a substantial, complete, or comprehensive description of the topic? Google will be looking for that. So even though you're asking yourself these questions, this is really what Google is looking at. So when we take a piece of content from our site, we then have to ask these questions. And there's even an opportunity to take these and feed them into Bard, Google Bard. So you can feed Google Bard your content, and then you can ask it these questions. And yes, you'll get hallucinations in the data, but you might get some useful insights from it as well. Now, this is another thing, and this is really going to blow the lid on SEO tools. Okay. Now, the other week, someone on LinkedIn posted a piece of content. I would love to bring it up now, but I'm worried that I'm going to struggle to find it. Let me just see if I can find it. Do bear with me one moment. It may be buried deep in my notifications. Hold on a second. Here we go. Right. So I'm just going to bring this over. So I saw this, and I had to call it out. Someone had put Google algorithm ranking factors, and then they put this. Okay. And what's worse is a lot of people interacted with this. From what I could see from the comments, a lot of people seem to be turned on by it. This looks great. But this is exactly the kind of thing that you need to stay away from. This is just complete misinformation. None of this is accurate. None of it. And this doesn't even scratch any of the surface. So stuff like this, absolutely stay away from it. If you ever see anything that quantifies something by percentage when it comes to SEO, just don't laugh at it, but don't take it on board. Now, the reason I bring this up is because what do people do? They rely on tools, and this is where a big problem happens. And this is also another reason why AI content doesn't tend to do as well. Now, that's not an arbitrary statement for all AI content. You could produce some AI content that does well. I did a test with AI content. Let me see if it's actually there. So I did an article and it's position 2. And this is produced by AI as part of my SEO testing and experimentation. But what I did was I used AI to create the content, but rather than getting it to write the whole article, I asked it questions. I took snippets. I removed things around. It's all entirely AI written, but it's not a single dump of data. I asked a question, took a bit of data, asked another question, took a bit of data. And what I did was I was asking questions that tie in. So things around, preserving wooden window frames, ISO certification, loads of other stuff. But the fact is that there's no arbitration in terms of like arbitrary guidelines. But here's the thing. When we look at helpful content, imagine you go to Google and you search for something and all the results are saying the same thing. Now, when you use tools, when you use content tools or analysis tools, do you know what the biggest problem is? They are scraping and looking at what already ranks. So when they are giving you the data to look at, and they say, you should write your content, you should do this, you should do that, they are using pre-existing content for their model. And what's the problem with that? Well, Google here, it says, does the content provide original information, reporting, research, or analysis? Well, if you're using a writing tool that's scraped the SERP and it's picked out all of the terms to use, you're not creating something unique, because what's going to happen is that Google is going to see the same context in what you're producing. Yeah, it might not match exactly, but it's going to be very similar. Okay. What you need to do when you want to rank for something is find something additional that you can add. You need to add value. So if you want to rank for something and, you do your intent analysis and, you work out, you look at the SERP and you work out what it is you've got to offer, then you find something that, could be beneficial to end users and you add that in, because then you have something unique. Now, do you know the biggest examples of where this problem exists? E-commerce sites. So e-commerce sites have this problem. Why? Because loads of e-commerce sites use scraped product descriptions. So you imagine if you've got an e-com site and you've been given thousands of product descriptions that are on hundreds of other sites, you do not have something of value. You don't have something new. And if you don't have something new and of value, why is Google going to serve it? It's not. And I see this so many times. What Google does now, especially with larger sites using scraped product descriptions, it doesn't even index the pages. It dumps them in crawl currently not indexed or discover currently not indexed, because you do not bring something new to the table. So this is really important. When you're creating your content or when you're auditing your pre-existing content, so let's say you've been hit by a helpful content update, start looking at, how unique is your content contextually? And again, you can use Google Bard for this. We're going to do some experiments and we're going to do some stuff. But it's fundamental that I get this across to everyone. So a lot of content is rehashed of what already exists. And that is where the danger of relying on writing tools comes in. So I typically answer questions at the end, but this time I'm going to answer a couple on the fly. So James has asked, if you worked for a large retail company that has an editorial team which produces quite a lot of inspirational content aimed for socials, how would you deal with this content? Would you just no index and no follow? Well, it really depends. I mean, if inspirational content, you've put the types of content I have in mind, the blog articles that may be titled "Our Favorite Streetwear Looks for This Winter," that are inspirational but aren't necessarily helpful. Yeah, so I mean, the fact that you put the word our on it basically means it's your company's, evaluation of maybe what's good. It's not to say that content like that can't be of value. I would always be looking at, if you Google our favorite streetwear looks for this winter, what does Google change the search to? So let's have a look. Our favorite streetwear looks for winter. So one important thing off the back of that, if you go to create content and you haven't done any research to see are people actually searching for it, what you can do is you can let the content get indexed, but then what you do is you need to look at the first 28-day performance to see the uptake, and then you need to start looking at the queries in Search Console. Let me give you a scenario. If a piece of content on your website is indexed and after 28 days or 30 days, you've got like loads of broken average position dots, your impressions are like a handful of impressions a day at most, and it's all fragmented. If you start seeing that, it's very probable that if the queries aren't well aligned with the article, then that article is not worth keeping in the index, in which you would no index follow it. If that content exhibits growing impressions, then you would sit on it and you would continue to track it. And again, I will cover this as well. So if you look, for example, our favorite streetwear looks for winter. Well, the word our is just completely being ignored here. And what they're doing is instead they're looking at inspirational terms. So you can see immediately that there's diversification in the SERP, and the features that you see dictate what Google's starting to see of the intent. So the fact that there's an image gallery here means that Google will be looking at, image-based content over text. So you can see here, this isn't saying that it's theirs. They're just saying, go to winter streetwear outfit combinations. You can see we've got a Pinterest here, which is going to be all images, 10 best outfit ideas. So what you can see is that these results are a bit fragmented. So if you're writing something, you wouldn't worry about the word our. You can use that as the article, but it's not going to change the context of the search. So if you want to rank for an article title, do a search for it and look at how different the actual results are to it, and also take into consideration what the SERP looks like. We can see here that it's heavily image-based. So, you'd factor that in. But typically, if you're unsure, create the content, let it get indexed. And if that content doesn't exhibit any sustained impression growth over 28, say 28 days because it's default, 30 days, 30, 60, 90 days, then, if it's not essential to the website, scrap it. Otherwise, no index follow. Right. So a lot of content tools scrape the SERP. This means recommendations are often made from pre-existing content. So we've already covered that. Helpful content isn't about volume. It's also about quality. SERP intent. Look at the SERP. Content length by position can be an indicator of intent. Now, I'm going to show you an example of that. Now, I'm not really a tool guy. What I mean by that is I don't knowingly rely on SEO tools. Okay, so I use Search Console, I use Screaming Frog, I use InLinks, I use a handful of tools, but I don't look at them and make arbitrary decisions based on the data. But what I will do is I'll show you something in Surfer and I'll explain why it's used. Okay. So when we're looking at SERP intent, or when we're looking at SERP, what we need to do is we need to understand that content length can be an indicator of intent. So let me explain. So in Surfer, there's something called a SERP analyzer. Now, I'm not promoting this. I don't have any affiliation with Surfer, and I'm not saying to go and sign up or anything like that. What I'm saying is that if you have your own way of getting the first 10 results in Google and looking at length, and you can do it manually. It's a bit slow. To be honest, I could probably write a Google script to do it, and I'll add that to my to-do list. So it will scrape the SERP and then it will calculate word length. But the reason that I do this is because it can be an indicator of intent. So for example, if I use my best wood for window frames, we do it in the United Kingdom. Let me create the analyzer. So what that's going to do, it's going to go to Google. It's going to scrape the top 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 results. And then what it's going to do is it's going to look at the word count by position. Now, word count is not a ranking factor at all, ever, full stop. What it is an indicator of is intent, and intent should shape what it is that you're planning to create. And again, it goes back to helpful content, because, you know, am I going to stuff 5,000 words about cheap shoes in under cheap shoes for a search in Google? No, because that wouldn't be helpful. So I type in cheap shoes and I go on here. And, you know, so intent is the number one priority here. Okay. So why would something like this rank? Well, the first thing is that, you know, it's a site that offers what I'm looking for, cheap shoes. The other reason that it ranks is the word cheap implies that I don't want to spend much. So Google would be silly to serve a site with loads of expensive shoes. So each piece of the word in the search, whenever you do a search for something, compartmentalize every word in your search string that you want to go after. Okay. So buy shoes and cheap shoes are two different terms, because I put the word cheap in, which indicates price is my concern, because I don't want something expensive. So we can see here, £5, £6, £7.95. They're all cheap. Okay. And there's shoes. Okay. The next thing is, what else could Google look at? Well, how many shoes have they got? That's going to help. Why? Because the more shoes there are, the more likely I am to transact, the more likely I am to sub-navigate. Now, go back a few years. What would I need in here? I would have my products, and then I would have loads of content. Okay. Now, you can see here that it's still done to a degree. There's probably some compensatory value in it, but very little. But you can see the general consensus is that Google knows that people searching for cheap shoes do not give a crap, excuse my French, about reading about cheap shoes. No one ever read the descriptions put in below the fold, unless it was about how quickly someone will get their product delivered or what their delivery or returns policy is. But no one Googles something with transactional or service-based intent to read a long-form article. So intent comes before anything else, and intent will dictate what is helpful. So when we look at our SERP analyzer, if we take the logic of what I just said, I put in the word best. So the word best turns my intent is something comparative. Okay, so I'm looking for a comparison, because the word best implies that something is better than something else, which means in that article there needs to be an indicator of why this is better than something else. Wood is a thing. Window frames are a thing. So we're saying the best entity for an entity. Okay, so wood as a topical entity, window frames as a topical entity, and then a comparison frame there. So if we put the word best in, the probability of short form content ranking is likely to fall. Now you'll see here what SERP has done is it's scraped page one, and it's looking at the average word length across all 10 results. Okay, from position 1 to 10, the average across 1 to 10 is 1,604 words. Now, if I change this average to 1, we can see that the SERP has diversification. We can see here 900 words, 4,000 words, 675 words. So we can see that there's lots of diversification in how long the content is. Now, a SERP can be of mixed intent, okay? So sometimes if someone searches for something, what Google will do is it will diversify the SERP, okay? And that diversification improves the probability that more people will find what they need, okay? If this was linear all the time, okay, the probability of people finding what they want goes down. So what Google will do is it will give each position its own ranking metrics, okay? So when people talk about ranking factors, this is why this is notoriously, I'm not going to say dangerous, that would be exaggerating, but I'd say this is really hyper misleading. And this isn't, I've seen loads of this all over Facebook, LinkedIn, I've seen it everywhere. And it's just, you just don't look at this kind of data anymore. You might have, had some value in it 15 years ago, certainly not now, because every position will have different ranking factors applied. Why? Because Google needs to serve different results so that it can learn user behavior. And then from that user behavior, because more people will navigate between results to find what they want, they build an overall picture of what is doing the best job out of all of that content. And they can shape the results to be more aligned along that pathway. And then obviously they can still keep the diversification, but they get an understanding of what people want. So if we see short form, long form, short form, short form, short form, medium form, long form, what Google is doing is diversifying. So we can start to understand a little bit more about the SERP. So for example, if the curve was different, let's say loads of page 1 was like 5,000, 8,000, 6,000, 4,000, 6,000, 8,000, then the general consensus is that, long form is more likely to be better. So an example of where we could see something like that is, I don't know, best electric scooters, okay? And we'll keep it in the UK. So best electric scooters is more likely to be long form because, we're going to probably have a review of 10 electric scooters, for example. That is probably going to be a few hundred words per scooter, plus you're going to have a comparison table and other things. So the general consensus is that this content is going to be longer, okay? And what we then have to take into consideration is that the length of content is one factor because it might help us understand intent, but then we need to understand the context of what that content is. So I'm just going to let that run for a minute. So does the content provide a substantial, complete, or comprehensive description of the topic? Now, what you need to understand is that these questions are broad, okay? Does the content provide a substantial, complete, or comprehensive description of the topic? Is probably not going to be needed for short, punchy questions. How many paracetamol can I take in a day? Well, do we need a substantial, complete, or comprehensive description of the topic? Probably not. However, again, and this is why it's always important to look at these things, if I put how many paracetamol to take in a day, or how many paracetamol I take, what Google might do is say, it will take a snippet from a web page. So a web page might have 5,000 words in it, and then in that content somewhere is a question: how many paracetamol can I take in a day? And then Google will just take a snippet from it. So what we can do is, again, using the SERP analyzer, we can look at how long the content is by position, and we can work out, do we do a short form to the point article, small short form answer that's punchy to the point, or do we need to do a longer form article around paracetamol, the dangers of paracetamol, age that you can take it, what it can be used for? So helpful content, is all determined by what you want to rank for. So not every scenario is going to need all of these things applying. Does the content provide insightful analysis or interesting information that's beyond the obvious? So, does the content provide a substantial, complete, or comprehensive description of the topic? That might not necessarily be needed. So again, I draw you back to this, okay? We just let this one run. So we can see here the average for page 1 is 2,800 words. When we look at it by an average of 1, we can see that 2,800, 5,000, 4,000. If it ever dips to the bottom, sometimes it can't get all of the data. But you can see here, it's generally medium form, okay? So if we see like quite a few medium form and the odd 1 or 2 long form, what that's going to mean is if we say best electric scooters, well, the intent is we want to find the best scooter because maybe you want to buy one. So what does that mean for us as a searcher in terms of finding something helpful? Well, we want a list of scooters. Are we going to want to read 5,000 words of every scooter? No, we're probably going to want, 10, 20 scooters, to the point overview of the scooter, pros and cons, list the key things that really matter. How fast can it go? What's the range? How much weight can it carry? So there's going to be key things that dictate at a query level, whether we go long form or short form or medium form. And then we need to take the end user considerations into that. And we'll come back to that. Does the content provide insightful analysis or interesting information that's beyond the obvious? So effectively, that ties in with the top point. If you're looking at intent where it's around research, then this is going to be more applicable. So if you were doing a study on global temperatures for the last 50 years, climate change, then you would want to demonstrate an insightful analysis and provide it in a way that was engaging, that says, for the last 50 years, here's the temperature. You might then say, well, from a helpful content perspective, we need to think what's most important for people and how do we offer it in a good page experience. So we might create like a visual chart of temperatures by year over the last 50 years, put in some images, put in a video, make the content really good and demonstrate that we've put, analysis into it. So all of these things come together when it comes to assessing helpful content. So next, we've got if the content draws on other sources, does it avoid simply copying or rewriting those sources? So again, when you're producing content, you need to produce something that's unique. Does the main heading or page title provide a descriptive, helpful summary of the content? So when we talk about page title, we're talking about title tag and page heading, because it was years that people spent putting keywords in header tags, title tags, but now you want to put something in there that is going to encourage a click, higher CTR. Does the main heading or title, page title, avoid exaggerating or being shocking in nature? So Google systemically does not want clickbait style stuff in the SERPs, because generally it's using something that is false or hyper over exaggerated to get people in, and then quite often it leads to a bad or not as good as page experience because maybe the content doesn't meet the expectations of the user. Is this the sort of page you want to bookmark, share with a friend, or recommend? That I'd say is probably at the lower end of things. Like, it's very often, even with good content, most people don't always tend to bookmark it. People tend to share stuff that's got more viral attributes to it, but are they going to share an article from your website on how to clean your windows or how to wash your car and avoid streaks? Probably not. So I wouldn't worry too much about that. This is just basically saying, have you made your content so good that people are more likely to do these things? Would you expect to see this content in or referenced by a printed magazine, encyclopedia, or book? Again, that one's very loose. Probably relates more to like lifestyle articles and blogs and things like that. So basically what they're saying is that generally, you know, encyclopedias and magazines have got quality standards. They've got internal editorial policies. So not using offensive language, not writing and making up stuff, not being factually inaccurate, not supporting it. Those are the kind of things that they're trying to drum in because, you know, there are obviously publications that probably publish rubbish, but in the general scheme of things, these things are important. Does the content provide substantial value when compared to other pages in the search results? So this is the point where you can compare. Okay. Now, one thing that I would say, and I think this is another important thing that you can do, if you want to rank for something and you apply this logic, does the content provide substantial value when compared to other pages in the search results? What you need to be careful of is, are you comparing apples to oranges or apples to apples? So what I mean by that is you need to compare against other stuff that is aligned from an intent. So remember, page one can have mixed intent things. So you might inadvertently compare your content to something where it's got against varying intent. So you need to look at more of the results, find the ones that closest align with what you have to offer. And then what you have to do is you have to look at how established are those results. So if you just bear with me 1 second. So let's say you want to compare. So we'll do best. One of my keys has just fallen off my keyboard. Best electric scooters. So let's say, and we're going to do this with Scooter Guide shortly. So within the next few minutes, we will finally get into the demonstration side of things. So this is really important. So what we're doing is, if we take a SERP, and as Google has stated, you know, would you say, compared to a site that's similar to yours, are you providing substantial value over the top of it? Now, you don't need to be ranking for this, or you could have lost rank for helpful content, and you're now going through the comparative phase. So what you're going to be doing is you're going to go through the SERP, maybe look at the SERP analyzer at this point to say, you know, what do the results look like from a content perspective? So we know it's like medium form, long form, medium form. So there's more medium form stuff there. So we're going to get an understanding that, you know, whatever we create, we're going to have to condense it. Okay. So we're not going to write, you know, we're not going to come along and do a 15,000 word article and expect it to rank, because as you can see here, the results well away from page one that are, you know, ranking on page 3, and they've got massive amounts of content. So it's not what you write in its singularity, it's how it's written, and if you've taken end user in. And there are auxiliary factors, like you need your site to be you know, clean rendering, technically sound. You know, it's not always essential, but best practice. And you need good links. So, and don't ever let anyone tell you links are dying or links are dead. They're not. So let's say, you know, we've taken our result. We actually, I believe, Scooter Guide used to rank, and it's probably lost quite a lot of those. So we sort of briefly around page 2. So we've never really had page 1 for that. And I will get all my rank back on this. But fundamentally, what we want to understand is, let's say, you know, we've picked out Tom's Guide is the closest to us, and Rider Guide is the closest to us. But the other ones, let's say, you know, they're a slightly different intent, or they're not quite the same. Then what I'm going to be wanting to do is looking at, you know, am I comparing my stuff to something that is a blip? Sometimes stuff comes up into search results, never to be seen again. So what you want to be looking at is, are you comparing apples to apples? And are you comparing against something that has position data? And does it have establishment? And the other thing that I would do is I would take these URLs and I would put them into Wayback Machine. Why? Because if you put this into Wayback Machine and you see that the page is 8 years old, but it only started ranking in the last 1 year to 2 years, then that page has probably got a lot of history behind it. They might have been doing a lot of experimentation. So you can look at Wayback and start to get an idea. And you can even use ChatGPT and Bard to access Wayback content to do a compare. But the point is that following Google's guidelines, if you're going to compare something, compare it with aligned intent and try and find something that is more established. Does the content have any spelling or stylistic issues? So a really basic one. The other day I was doing an audit. God, I've got RSI on a site called Lexington Adjusters. And, you know, there really is nothing going for this at the minute, but there will be. And, you know, it's like you go on here. And so, you know, there's nothing wrong from a spelling perspective, but look at it. You know, it's just, when you see something like this, it just looks like there's been no effort. Someone's taken content, that's just dumped it in there, not worried about formatting. You know, when you look at stuff like this visually is just a turn off because, you know, say not great imagery, poor formatting, you know, it just doesn't tick the boxes of something that's really attractive, really starts with a good flow and you know, engaging. So, you know, stylistic issues, you don't want your content to look like a dog's dinner, and you certainly need to really consider what end users are going to want. You know, what do they want to consume? Good content is not just text, it's pictures, it's tables, it's charts, it's downloads, it's videos. The more you put in there, the more helpful your content is likely to be perceived as. So definitely don't want any spelling mistakes. That is a no-no. 2023, 2024, sorry, but you cannot have spelling mistakes. All content editors now have spell checks in them. You've got Grammarly. Spelling mistakes just make it look like someone's chucked something together and not paid attention to it. And styling issues are not acceptable in 2023. They never really have been, but from a ranking perspective, styling impacts user engagement. Bad user engagement leads to ranking impact. So you want to make sure that you are making a concerted effort from all angles. Is the content produced well, or does it appear sloppy or hastily produced? Well, you can always tell good content from bad content just by the way it starts, just by the way it presents itself. Does it provide a summary? Is it giving you an overview? Is it breaking the content up? Is it making it so that you want to continue with the flow of it? You can always tell lazy content is just slapped together. It's not just formatting issues. It's about how you start the content. And does that content have a flow? Is it using a good vocabulary? Does it make you want to keep reading? Or is it just using the same tone of voice, the same wording over and over again? Does it repeat itself? These are the things that you also need to make sure that your content doesn't have in it. Is the content mass produced by outsourced to a large number of creators or spread across a large network of sites? So mass-produced content is typically AI content. Mass-produced content can be done by outsourcing, but a lot of outsourcing now will use AI to remain competitive. So just remember that. If you think that you're going to go and order content at scale, be really careful. And don't let anyone tell you that AI content detectors are going to get rid of AI-produced content. They're not accurate. I would just stay away from them. If you're outsourcing to a large number of creators, there is something that you can do. And I did this, and I'm going to show you this. And I think this is one of the best things that I've done. I've got like a list of best things that I have done for my own SEO progression. I'm going to show you this. Well, I look for this. Mohammed asks, do you think Google is sometimes biased with rankings? If we search for the keyword Michael Bolton illness, the second result, top movie rankings, have the expert with spelling mistakes of recording. How do they rank? So just remember, SEO is the sum of lots of moving parts. Just because one area exhibits a lack of something, just remember as well, you get anomalies, you get ranking anomalies, you get stuff that ranks and then gets removed from the index pretty quickly. Loads of people, since the helpful content update rolled out, have been complaining about Quora and Reddit doing well. And the reason for that is because Quora and Reddit typically is UGC content. For a lot of searches, the UGC content is really unbiased, as opposed to a lot of content that tries to rank that is biased. That's not to say that those results warrant ranking, but Google does correct these things. Right, so I now need to find where the sheet was yesterday. Just bear with me. If I could use AI to do anything, it would be to organize all my stuff. I have like a million slides. I've got sheets all over the place. So I'm just going to find it. Bear with me. So what I did was I took a site, I exported all of the data from GSC for the site. Then I crawled the site using something called a custom extraction. And then with the custom extraction, what I did was I got all of the authors. Then I VLOOKed up the data to see which authors were performing and which ones weren't. And I will get to it very shortly. Here we go. So just for the sake of anonymizing the data. So I'm going to make a copy of the sheet and just hide some of the data. Bear with me. All right, so bear with me. Here we go. Just gonna... Okay, so bear with me. Okay, here we go. So what I did, sorry it took so long. And I'll show you how to do this. I'd say by 5 o'clock, we're going to start the practical stuff. Then I'm going to carry on. Just remember, if you need to drop off for any reason, you're going to get the full recording anyway. And I probably will go on for quite a while yet. So as I said earlier, I want to make sure that you all get the absolute maximum value out of this. The whole point of me, doing these is that I want to make sure people learn as much as possible, benefit from it, and obviously get their rankings and traffic back, and obviously protect themselves against any future losses. So what I did here was I used a custom crawl in Screaming Frog, and I got Screaming Frog to crawl the website, and with the custom extraction, it got the name of every author. Then what I did was with the URL and the author, I then got the GSC click data and I paired it up, and then I used a script to count for each author how many articles they wrote, how many clicks they generated. So you'll see here, there's the list of authors, and you can see how many articles they've written, how many clicks they generated, how many clicks per article they generated, how many performance articles, good, fair, weak, and dead articles. And what that allows you to do, especially if you're running, a site with a blog and you've got various people writing, it allows you to gauge their performance. Now, with the best will in the world, if you took 10 writers, there's going to be a best writer and there's going to be a worst writer. That's just how it is. There's always going to be a best and a worst of something. So for any content strategy, if you've got a website and, for a year or two, you had an in-house writer, then you outsourced to an agency, then you went to a content agency, and you've got bits of content here, bits of content there, all over the place. And what you need to do is you need to establish what content has worked and what content hasn't worked, and who was responsible for that content, because then you can correct your strategy. Too many times, businesses come and booked an audit with me. I tear the site apart, but then the same people continue to put out content to a standard that's not good enough to rank. So for years and years and years, they might have been writing articles for the website, and because Google wasn't that complex, the articles would rank and generate traffic. But now the authors, the writers, they are no longer keeping up with EAT or YMYL or helpful content. So what happens? They're producing content. That content doesn't rank, doesn't get indexed, or it starts to rank for a little bit of stuff, but the performance is poor. So helpful content is also about your ability to maintain, manage, and produce content. Like if you've been hit by a helpful content update and your writers aren't, clued up, and they're thinking about keywords when they write an article, and people still do it. I hear people talking about, let's write a blog. What keywords should we do it on? What keywords do we put in the title? Do we have to put the keywords in the article? I still hear that in 2023. So there's clearly a big problem with it industry wise. But the point is that writers are not SEOs. So if Google is changing the bar on what good content is, then if the writers aren't familiar with it, and they're not specialists in a niche, or they don't understand the product or service, they may produce content that flops. So this table is a great way to overcome who's doing well and who isn't. And the people that aren't doing well, train and test and train until they build up and they understand helpful content, then they adjust their strategy and they go on to do well. Or you let go of them and you replace them and find a better resource. So this is really good. So I can basically go in and maybe I find someone that, has written at least, let's say 500 articles, because there's no point analyzing someone that's written 20 articles, we might not necessarily gauge. So what we're going to do is we're going to look at the people that have written more articles. Okay. Then what we'll do is we'll say, okay, well, let's sort by how many clicks were generated. Okay, and we'll do highest to lowest. Okay, so then what we can start doing is we can start seeing, for the volume of articles that are written, what their click profile looks like. Now, this particular site was missing loads of GSC data, so I couldn't get dead URL data. But then you can start applying filters at each level. How many weak articles, how many fair articles. And this is a great way to start honing in and refining. And this will be more useful to larger publications. But, even some e-com sites I see with 100, 200 blogs. So, you can do it on sites, even if you've got less content. Okay, so let's back. Right, so let's continue. What we'll do, few minutes, we'll stop for a 10-minute break, just so I can grab another cup of tea, go to the toilet, and then we'll carry on with the next part of it after a short interlude. So I think actually we already covered the last part here. Okay. So what we're now going to do is I'm going to really quickly zoom over these bits. We'll do the interlude and then we'll carry on. So are we meeting end user intent? What does the query infer in respect of intent? What are people asking or searching for in relation? Are we isolating out and drilling down to subfactors? Are we presenting content using an information prioritization approach? Do users who have a clear intent have to work harder to find what they want? Are we offering a good page experience? Are we writing using the correct tone of voice, language, writing style? Can our website traffic give us wider insights, i.e. user engagement? So, first of all, as I mentioned earlier, are we meeting end user intent? So if we want to rank for something, the first thing that we should always do is we should break our terms down. Okay, so let's say I want to rank for cheap Ford Fiesta. Okay, so the words cheap, we have the word Ford, we have the word Fiesta. Okay, now again, just to reiterate, the whole point of like me getting into helpful content at this level is in order to recover from rank loss, you need to fully understand the fundamentals. The more you understand the fundamentals, the more you're going to be able to take the fundamentals. And then when you go back to look at your content, you're going to be able to say, right, okay, here are the checks that I'm going to do. And then you start uncovering the gaps. And it's those gaps that, you know, if you've been hit specifically by a helpful content update, likely be those gaps. They can be extenuating circumstances, but we will cover those. Right, so what we'll do really quickly. So the word cheap sets the first part of the chain. Okay. So what does cheap mean? Well, cheap means low cost. Okay. But in relation to what? So what can Google use to determine that? Well, what it will do is from its index data, it will then be able to look at all of the sites that meet the criteria under the word cheap. So what it will do is based upon loads and loads of data, they'll have huge amounts of data sets. They will be able to understand from thousands of sites what cheap looks like in terms of cost areas. So it might be that consistently Google sees that cheap is anywhere from £500 to, I don't know, $499, let's say. Okay. So what we have is this data set will then be sub-calculated. Okay. And I'll explain why. And don't worry if you're like looking at this thinking, how am I going to understand? It will all become clear. Watch this. So the next part, so we'll leave this here. The next part is that this is a manufacturer. My lines aren't overly straight, but okay, and this is a manufacturer. What I've been doing like long hours for many years, and unfortunately, I suffer with really bad RSI. So like I get weakness when I'm using my mouse and when I'm using my keyboard, which is really horrible. So yeah, so we've got Ford. So what you got to remember is we're treating, if someone was to stand in front of you and say a word, and then you would have to say what comes to mind. This is what we're doing here. We're compartmentalizing it. So Ford, we know, is a manufacturer. What do they manufacture? They manufacture cars. Okay. And then what type of cars? So, you know, you got Fiesta, Mondeo, I don't know, just Galaxy, whatever. Okay. And then we've got Fiesta. Okay. So Fiesta is a car. And, you know, that car will have attributes. So you'll have things like petrol or diesel. Then you'll have automatic or manual. Then you'll have different trims and so forth. So, there's lots of sub parts to this. Okay. Now, what happens is that Google uses entities, it uses natural language processing, and it uses other things. So when we look at these words in